Namaste. The title of this talk is Hindu Temple as a social institution. In other talks, we saw that how a Hindu temple is primarily a spiritual institution, which it is, but it is also a social institution because had it only been a spiritual institution, then it would have been confined to a few individuals. But the fact that in various parts of India, where there were the least number of invasions for the least amount of time, we actually saw the development of the Hindu temple as a huge institution. We can see that it is also a social institution and not just a spiritual institution. First of all, socially speaking, the temple is a center of learning. And before we go on and use these words social and spiritual, we should understand that in Hindu tradition, in Sanatan tradition, there is no boundary which separates the two. There is simply the preponderance of one element in one kind of institution or in another kind of institution. So when I say social, that does not exclude the spiritual, but also includes it. So the first thing about a temple is that it is a center of learning. We now have in modern times universities and schools and colleges. But most of the learning that was done for a long period of time in India was done in and around the temple. So the temple was a great center of learning. This was not just true about the esoteric knowledge or the knowledge which was concerned with the Vedas only, or the sacred text, or the most you can say the primary text of Sanatan Dharma. This was not just confined to this, but also to other various sorts of learning. Even today, when you go to various temples all across India, where the institution is very much functional, where the temple is not just a structure, where the temple is also a living institution, you can actually see the real learning which is taking place at various places in the temple. When I went to the Chidambaram temple, if you still go, you can see the Brahmins there studying various different branches of knowledge, of Indic knowledge traditions. Most of the agraharas that existed around a great temple or even within a great temple. Even today, even where there is no formal agraharas, there are a lot of scholars who live temporarily or permanently in and around the temple. Around a great temple, let's say the Chidambaram Nataraja temple, you can see there are many houses where many near the temple where great scholars live. So the temple was a great center of learning of various kinds. It actually functioned in Indic knowledge traditions as a sort of university, which was decentralized and universal at the same time. This is a very difficult feat to achieve, but Sanatan Dharma has achieved it again and again, to make things universal and yet decentralized. Because the modern way to make anything universal is to enforce it from above, but in most things. But Sanatan Dharma, through with the help of the temple as an institution of learning, made learning decentralized and also universal. Because there was no village which was without a temple, no town which was without a single temple. And none of these temples were so that they were just structures and that no learning used to take place there. So the temple was a great center of learning. The temple was also a socio-economic entity. How? Even today, if you go to various temples, I did a study on a mutt in Kolhapur, Sri Kadsiddeshwar Mutt, and there are a lot of activities which go on at any given time in the temple. A temple has many rituals, a temple has many routines, a temple is as an institution, it has many dependents on it. And so a lot of different activities keep taking place at any given day, on any time during the year. These people who offer these rituals, for example, in a living institution, the deity, if it is a Shiv temple, there is a regular Abhishek of the temple. If it's a Vishnu temple, there is regular Shringar of the main Vigraha and also of the other deities which are present in the temple. In these rituals, a lot of material is used, a lot of different articles are used. In most of the traditional temples until the British came, most of the sources that were used, most of the material that was used, it was actually grown by people who were dependent upon the temple, who were living in or inside or near the temple. And so some would offer ghee and other milk products, some would offer the clothes, some would offer the vegetables, some would offer the grains that went into making of the prasadams, some would actually sew the clothes, some would offer various different activities, even as small activities as making the padukas of the deity and all the subsidiary deities, the Utsav Murtis of the deity. So there were hundreds of different activities. They are listed in the agamas, that how a complete temple, how many rituals should take place in a complete temple. And all of these people, all of these sevas were offered by a family. Individuals were rarely considered in this, entire families were considered. So one family would offer flowers to the deity, and that family would actually become dependent on the temple. Their livelihood will be dependent on the temple. Their families will be given a place on the land of the matha, on the land of the temple. They will till the land around it. They will grow their own food, and they will offer some to the temple, and they can live in perpetuity there. Their descendants can live on the same land until forever. They just cannot sell the land to anyone, but otherwise they can make their entire livelihood by being dependent on the temple. So at any given time, agriculture was going on. Some would grow vegetables, some would grow grains, and then all other kinds of socio-economic activities would also go on. Even now, when the system is largely destroyed by the neglect of the state, apathy of the state, mostly the secular state that came in effect after independence, even when it is largely undergone, you can see that in and around the temple, a lot of needs of the devotees, of the dependents of the temple, there are a lot of shops which wouldn't be there, which wouldn't exist at all if the temple would not be there. And as we saw in the case of Srirangam temple, that the temple is so huge, there are 7 gopurams, 7 prakara, that there are banks inside, entire shops inside the temple, within the confines of the temple. Entire shops, entire houses, entire institutions within the same temple. So a temple incorporated all of these activities, socio-economic activities, inside the temple. The temple was, of course, a great center of arts. In order to create a temple, in order to build a temple, 2-3 arts are central to it. The most important being the architecture, of course. The architects were involved, whose livelihood was, of course, dependent upon the temple. Then great sculptors were also involved. There is no temple in which there aren't hundreds and hundreds of sculpture of different vigrahas, different beautiful vigrahas of very different deities, very many deities. And so the sculptors are there, and they didn't just come there to sculpt or create a vigraha. Entire workshops were conducted within the temples, because it is an art which cannot just be learned by in just a workshop which is separated or divorced from the actual site of a temple. So most of the workshops, even today, when you those who want to become sculptors, great sculptors, they actually have to go to these sites, go to these great temples to learn how what is the ultimate place of the sacred vigraha. So the sculptors were dependent upon the temple. Then in any temple, any living institution, if you go to at any given time, a certain musical feat is taking place, a certain musical event is taking place, and music is not alone, dance always almost accompanies it. So there is singing, there is dancing, there is incantation of sacred mantras. A lot of different activities, different artistic activities are going on at the same time in a temple. A temple is also a place for beautiful paintings. A lot of our temples still sport and sported historically lot of most beautiful paintings. Even a temple as old as the Thanjavur Brihadishwar temple, it had a great set of paintings which now most of all are gone, but still you can see the glory of those paintings which were created 1000 years ago on the wall. The rules are the same of Hindu iconography. So the rules which go into making of a painting also go into the making of a sculpture, a 3D vigraha. And so iconography is another science, another learning another craft or art which has temple at its center. All of these, temple was a center for all of these different arts and fine arts, and they went along in one rhythm with often mirroring symbolism in different fields. So the the image of the cosmic seed, image of the beach, it actually permeates painting, sculpture, architecture, everywhere. The holistic way of teaching not just different branches of philosophy and science, but also of arts. They were because they existed because there were institutions in Sanatan Dharma which could actually teach all of them in a holistic manner with a language of symbolism which actually crossed boundaries and was universal. A temple was, of course, a great center of literature. Some of the greatest compositions in the history of Sanatan Dharma, they have been created in one or other sacred tirth. Even many dramas, many classical plays in Sanskrit have been created in and around the great temples like the great temples of Ujjain. So it was, of course, a great center of learning, great center of different branches of art, and great center of literature. But it was interestingly very much also a great center of social welfare. Now, social welfare, when the state does it, because the state does it with a purpose, with a different purpose, it becomes sterile. It becomes, at first it looks good, but then there is no individual warmth in it. There is no emotion in it. And so after some time, it actually destroys the institutions, the social institutions that are in place to actually carry on those activities. But when the temple does it, it does it with the spiritual goal in sight. And so the institutions which are necessary to keep dharma afloat, to keep this dharmic society, a society like Sanatana Dharma afloat, when a temple does it, when a spiritual institution does it, it doesn't destroy these intermediate institutions. So a temple still functions as a social welfare institution. In any great temple, if you go, not just the great Tirupati temple or many temples in Maharashtra, even very small temples, when you go there, you can see that they are running some kind of hospital, some kind of hostels for those who do not have any place to live, who are studying there. There are some schools, some colleges, Ayurvedic center, modern hospitals. So they at any given time run a lot of these centers. Of course, every temple has an Annakshetram, which is in which anyone can eat, anyone can have his have food anytime without any questions asked, without any money, without any compulsory service in in return. So the food is almost always distributed in all the temples all across India. But along with that, there are a lot of social welfare activities like we just discussed, which also take place in and around the temple. Logically developing on temple as a social welfare system, it is also a social security system. Social security system means that in times of great emergencies, in times of like great floods and famines, temples actually come out and they empty their coffers to help everyone who is in need. So they become the institutions which are not, when even when the state collapses or even when the state is not very strong, the temple becomes a primary institution to come to the help of the those who really are poor or who are in need. So it also doubles up as a social security institution. And the feature of temple which most surprised me when I started studying the Hindu temple was that it also functioned as a sort of legal aid clinic. When I went to the Veer Narayan temple in Belawadi, Chikmagalur in Karnataka, when I was visiting, the chief priest there is a good friend of mine, Sri Prashant Bharadwaj. And when I was there, actually some people came in one of the temples and they were discussing for a long time, for more than half an hour. I asked him what they came for, and he said that they came because there was some legal dispute in the village. And so I asked that then why did they come here? They should go to courts or they should go to the state, the judiciary, the institutions of the state. Then they replied, no, most of the disputes that take place here, most of the small disputes, people actually solve them in front of the deity here. They come to the Narasimha temple, they sit in front of the deity, and it is believed that no one can lie in front of the deity. and the priest along with the local community, they sit there, they solve the problem together, because everyone from there, so there is no one can actually run away to a faraway place and do something bad and then run away to a faraway place. And they actually use the temple as a legal aid clinic, and most of the cases which would go to courts and drag on for years, which are very small cases, very small disputes, they actually never go to the courts, and everyone has saved a lot of trouble. So this showed me that even in its dilapidated condition, temple as an institution is actually such a myriad socio-economic entity, and also a legal entity, a center of learning, a center of arts, a center of literature, a center of even law, that to ignore it and actually invest all the energies of societies and state into institutions which are imposed from the West is to invite disaster and do nothing more, in my opinion. And some of this has actually happened. Temple as an institution has been destroyed due to foreign Islamic invasions in the medieval ages and in modern times, with the apathy of the British and then the neglect of the secular state in modern times. One act actually destroyed temple as a living institution. I am forgetting the particular title of the act, but it was related to tenancy. And that act actually dictated that whoever is living on a particular piece of land for a certain period of time, let's say for 10 or 20 years or 30 years or so, that land actually legally belongs to his. He can get the legal title of his. And so the families which were living on the temple lands, which were actually temple lands, which temple had given to these families to till in return of a seva, which would connect a beautiful ecosystem in which everyone was in a way dependent on the temple, and the temple could redistribute the wealth of the society which came from kings and businessmen who donated at the temple, and redistributed among the people who were actually needful of that. And to keep an ecosystem alive, to not just distribute wealth for free every time, because that creates a social welfare society, which very dead society, which is now in the modern West, which has now been created in the modern West, in which no one wants to do anything, and there is lethargy everywhere, there is despondence, depression everywhere. But temple actually manages to turn this social welfare activity into a very meaningful spiritual activity, in which everyone is dependent on the state, their livelihoods are taken care of, they have no tension of, no worry of that where will they live or what will they eat, and in return they are actually involved in a very sacred, very spiritual activity. And it created a beautiful ecosystem which functioned on many levels, on many dimensions. With that single act of a secular government in a secular state, it destroyed temple as a living institution. Overnight, those lands, those temple lands, which were actually temple lands, they were actually awarded to people who now had no obligation to serve to the temples, because many of these lands were in prime real estate areas. So many of these, at first nobody sold the lands, but then gradually land mafia came and they started offering crazy money to these people, and a lot of these people sold these lands. As a result, temple as an ecosystem was destroyed. Now you can see at various great places, various great temples in India, if you go there, you can see that a modern building or a housing complex rises just behind the beautiful temple, and there is no sacred space anymore. The temples are just like wells, because on all sides there are great buildings. It has happened in Bhubaneswar and happened in many other places across India. So a single act of misunderstanding, single act of secular state, which by definition refuses to understand the sacred spiritual institutions of India. Temple as a living institution was destroyed. This is why this in a way was the death of the Hindu temple. The death didn't just happen when the Islamic invaders came. The death also happened because the sacred and spiritual institutions of the country, of this sacred land, were not only forgotten, but the state became actively hostile towards them. And this beautiful tree, this beautiful institution, it was destroyed. I hope that in future temples become free from state intervention. They are allowed to manage their own affairs uh, themselves as various great scholars, much more competent than me, who are fighting for this. And I hope that really happens, because temple became a center of Hindu society, and a lot of Hindu institutions, a lot of branches of study, literature, arts became dependent upon it, with a spiritual touch, with this touch of dharma. And without temple, all of these branches, like lost children, they go their own way without any spiritual connection to other disciplines, without any spiritual connection or any real connection to their own culture, civilization, and history. And so temple as a sacred institution is destroyed. I hope that this is corrected. I hope that temple again becomes a living institution, and those temples which are living institutions, they are preserved for our posterity. Thank you.